Welcome to Post-Doom Conversations. I'm your host, Michael Dowd. And this was recorded on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2020. The very first conversation in this series in a post-coronavirus era. It's with Jem Bendell, one of the main inspirations for this series. You'll see it starts with a preview, and Connie, my wife, has added text and image overlays to make it a really educational experience. Enjoy.
So it's the first time I've talked about coronavirus, and so I think I should say, so it has come as a bit of a surprise to the core team and the 50+ volunteers of Deep Adaptation. I'm very grateful to some of the volunteers who in January were saying, Jem, this is so important, could be really massive, and although it's not directly climate related, it's so related to the whole Deep Adaptation framework and philosophy about preparing for collapse and being kind and wise in that context. And so, yeah, I am wanting. We will announce quite soon and put out through all the networks, about 15,000 people in our networks. We're going to invite more people to step up and organize online deep listening circles for people to express and connect around difficult emotions. And then perhaps a second step would be online, the death cafe format, where people in small groups just sit and talk about their relationship with death, because if 70% of most populations are going to get this, and then death rates for over 70s are 15% or something. There will be a lot of loss. Holding that and help, and especially when we've got physical distancing of people, holding that. Okay. All right. Hello.
Hello. Well, to say that I've been looking forward to this conversation, Jem, would be a real understatement, because your Deep Adaptation paper and so many of the things that you've written and produced video since then have been one of the major inspirations. I mean, I really consider your work, the Deep Adaptation work, and the forum and the Positive Deep Adaptation Forum on Facebook, and Catherine Ingram and Dar Jamel and Barbara Cecil and Paul Trafurka, probably the four major, even though I think I'm older than you, you're an older brother on this path. And so at any rate, it's a joy to finally have this conversation. And you are the very first, as I mentioned in the email. All the other conversations that I've had have been in a pre-coronavirus epic time. I mean, we're no longer there. We're living in a very different world, and I'd love to hear how you frame and now interpret and now hold and see your work in this post, or not post, but after coronavirus, in these coronavirus days. So at any rate, before we get started on that, for people who may not be familiar with you, if you could just take a few minutes and just give a little background in terms of, what you're best known for, obviously the Deep Adaptation stuff, but help the viewer or the listener to sort of get who you are in a nutshell.
Sure, I can do that. So thank you, Michael, for the invitation. I am somebody who's known now for the concept of deep adaptation, which is a framework for processing emotions and thoughts around a near-term societal collapse induced by climate change. Not only climate change, but that being the thing which makes it inevitable. So I'm known for that, mainly because of a paper I wrote in July 2018, which went viral, which was the first paper I wrote on that topic. I'd given a speech on the topic about a year before, when I was still sort of sensing my way into this way of looking at life, because prior to that I'd been a professor in a business school on sustainability, corporate social responsibility, sustainable enterprise, sustainable finance, that kind of thing. So based on the idea that we can, with innovative radical thinking, change the system, reform the system in time to somehow preserve our way of life and within the ecosystems we live in. So that's, yeah, and that I've done that work. Sustainable development is the broad framework. I've done that work as an activist. As are you hearing noises in the background?
I can hear the dog.
Yeah. So I can't do anything about that. That's the problem of living in it.
Then we'll just deal with it. Not a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I worked at the UN. I worked at WWF, the environmental group. I worked in also anti-globalization groups. And as a corporate strategy consultant and as a political communications consultant. So lots of things, but broadly framed by this idea of sustainable development.
One of the things I've appreciated about your more recent framing of this, and for anybody watching or listening to this, know that I've thought so highly of Jem's work that on my SoundCloud, I have about 15 of his essays, all audio recorded. How would you describe where you think or feel this work is now in light of this latest economic contraction, collapse, and this coronavirus uncertainty that's more than uncertainty? It's like, this is huge. We've never known anything like this in our lifetime. So I'm just curious, how has that shifted anything for you?
Yeah, it's certainly brought things more into the present moment. So a lot of my work, while recognizing that people around the world, millions of people, are being affected by climate chaos already, whether they are climate refugees or whether they're just living closer to the land and losing their harvests than many of people like us. Or whether they're even exposed to diseases like dengue fever, which are spreading around the world much more rapidly because of climate change. So there's a lot of people who have been suffering for decades already because of climate chaos. But the Deep Adaptation Framework really took off amongst people, mainly in the West, who sort of educated middle classes, I guess, who, for them, it was the first time that climate change really became connected to their own sense of personal vulnerability. This is about me and my family. This is about whether I can stay in my job. This is about whether the supermarkets will empty. So it suddenly became much more about us, but still about how do I process that emotionally and intellectually with that anticipation. And what do I do? What do I do with my job, with my community, with my politics, whatever? But yes, it wasn't so here and now in the way that coronavirus in the last weeks has become very much here and now. So, for example, 2 years ago, my father, he lives in he has a flat there's maybe, I don't know, 8 neighbors, and they have a gorgeous ornamental garden. 2 years ago, and they're all retired. And I said, Dad, you know how your dad used to just love spending all his time growing veg and berries and everything in his back garden? Yeah, you should start doing that.
Exactly.
You have this gorgeous ornamental garden, and actually, why not put half of it over to food? Because it's also walled garden, which is kind of handy if you're actually you didn't want to talk about the dark side of the future and the futility ultimately of growing your own food if everyone around you is starving. But at least it's a nice way of also the other side to it was inviting more cooperation amongst his neighbours. But it's very different now where we've got a family WhatsApp group where I'm saying, Dad, now's the time to have that conversation because we do not know what the future holds. We do not know. We have seen in Britain how awful the government is at various levels, but the way that they can't seem to have moral clarity and courage and stick to truth, they'll just keep. It's like everything they say is involving some kind of cover-up or distraction, and yeah, so it's like right now, having those conversations right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been walking around with some kind of latent, low-level sense of panic. And so it's a bit of a wake up for myself
Yeah.
about where I'm at in my own personal development, psycho-spiritual, sorry. I've only had one coffee this morning. Psycho-spiritual, yeah, development. So I am not this fully equanimous, instantly in open-hearted, clear-sighted advisor of the masses, or even my dad, about what to do. So, and
Well,
probably,
actually, hold on. I want to
probably
challenge
neither
what.
are you, and neither
Yeah.
are
No.
you, and neither is
Exactly.
anyone
Exactly.
watching this.
That's
Neither is anyone
exactly
watching
it.
this.
But I
So,
do
yeah.
appreciate. I want to just jump in and say this: that of all the things you've done, or that I'm aware of, because I've not read everything, but the thing that I love to lead people in with is the one on "Don't Police Our Emotions," which
Oh,
was
yeah.
sort of an addendum to your yearly, a year after Deep Adaptation. But what I love about that one so much is that you really define equanimity not as serenity, not as just everything's cool. It's basically be truly accepting, including your grief, your anger, your frustration, your confusion. I mean, it's really a radical acceptance of what's real in the moment, both internally and externally. And I just think that's right on the money.
Yeah, thanks. And that's okay. So there's a number of things I have learned since I have no longer had the support for the defensive supports of my identity. So that's what's the big thing of the deep adaptation outlook is it's that suddenly, oh, my old story of contribution and self-worth from contribution sort of dissolves. And yes, it's been a real push for me to look at my inner world and to not just read books about stuff, but actually to spend time, for example, in insight meditation. It's called Vipassana.
I've done a
And
10-day Vipassana meditation retreat
okay,
with my son, and he's done about
uh-huh.
20 of them. In fact, I just performed the wedding in Colombia, South America,
Right.
of my son, who's 34, and his 31-year-old bride now, and they met at a 30-day Vipassana meditation retreat.
All right. Okay. But they weren't meant to speak or even look at each other. So that must have been some
They met.
spiritual transpersonal
It's
connection.
really fun. It was right before the 30-day began. My son was serving. He was in the kitchen. They interacted for 30 seconds, and he walked away and thought to himself, "Who is that angel?" And then he had to wait 30 days to talk with her again.
He's a keeper.
Yes.
So I've also even noticed that humor and comedy, which I love, is also a flight from pain. So seeking bliss through meditation, flight from pain, seeking avoidance of fear of impermanence and our own personal death through believing that absolutely there's an afterlife and there'll be some walking, talking soul called Jem somewhere, somehow. That's also flight from fear and pain. Beginning to, and even me being a smart thinker and talker and communicator is trying to escape the unknowability of the existence we have and the uncertainty of the future. It's an escape into cleverness. So what I've got from the crumbling of my old stories of self and being in that despair has been to talk to people who value the importance of pain and difficult emotions, who they sometimes talk about shadow, they sometimes talk about welcoming the darkness as much as the light. But Vipassana is one method, but also just talking to incredible wise women is my other recommended method.
I'm with you 100%. Occasionally a wise man like Paul Trafurka too, I found very helpful. But yes, the women in my life who regularly exude wisdom. We just spent quite a bit of time up in the Pacific Northwest, and I got a chance to spend time with Barbara Cecil, and I've known Barbara for 20 years, but it was just, she's one of those souls that exudes wisdom. And of course, Joanna Macy, she became a mentor in 1988, and I'm just eternally grateful for that relationship as well.
So I'm just going to express some essentialist feminism here, is that I think that maybe women are less pain averse than us guys, both in terms of physical and emotional pain,
exactly.
and therefore they're able to turn towards it rather than instinctively turn away from it or rise above it with trying to be clever and smart and pontificate about everything.
That's very interesting.
So therefore, wise women are who we should all be listening to, and as we as a culture are collectively traumatized now by this situation. So the handicap you and I have is that we risk being two white guys telling other people how to think. And we've had a lot of that, haven't we?
Yeah, well, that's why I love these conversations. I mean, for me, post-doom, it actually, just even the concept came about because I was having more and more conversations who had moved beyond the grief, but it wasn't, they were in avoidance. It was like, there's a door, there's something possible on the other side of despair, on the other side of grief, that isn't about denying that. And it's not about denying our mortality, including our species mortality, but it's fully embracing the totality of life and then finding ways to be compassionate and generous and in action on that other side. And that seems to me holy territory.
There we go. Is that recorded? So I should just have you speaking then, just every 10 minutes on my phone all day, you know. Just that, exactly just what you said. Holy territory as well. You say it, preach it. Yeah.
Thanks,
Can I join?
I feel the same.
Your church. What is your church?
I was originally ordained in the United Church of Christ, but now the last 18 years, Connie and I have spoken to, I don't know, 2,700 groups across North America, every kind of religious and secular setting imaginable. So it's a very weird lifestyle, but we love it. It's, you know, I'm speaking to you from Eureka, California. We're here for, well, we think we're here for another month and a half, but with Corona, we could be here longer than that. Who knows? But where we speak at is where science, inspiration, and sustainability intersect. But now I don't even like sustainability for exactly some of the reasons you've written about. It's like deep adaptation. It's right relationship to reality. And frankly, I think that there's a very good chance, as you articulate, that, well, it seems to me that Homo colossus is destined for extinction. You know, industrial rapacious humanity absolutely goes extinct, probably pretty soon. That may or may not mean the extinction of Homo sapiens, but it could. And the societal collapse of one form, I mean, we have over 100 examples of civilizations, unsustainable civilizations that collapse. So what you're saying from a deep time perspective and a historical perspective is so non-controversial, and yet you've got these prophets of progress like Steven Pinker out there that are getting people's attention. And so you have to make, and we have to make, and others that are part of the series have to make, you know, the case, but to not do it arrogantly, just to basically accept people, make a difference where we can, and, you know, move from there.
It's interesting you use the word prophets of progress. That does connect with the idea that the assumption of progress and the valuing of progress is so sacrosanct in not just in American or Western culture, but now pretty much everywhere, that it feels like it's somehow disgusting to be talking about anything other than an assumption of progress. And so we do see that with environmental and climate scientists, that they feel that in order to be respectful and respectable, they must conclude at the end that, oh, but we can still do this, whoever the we is. And then the problem, therefore, is that people who say, well, let's have a wider conversation, not give up on trying, but open up to a wider conversation about, well, what if we're not going to do this? And therefore, how do we, what's still true? What's still good?
Yes.
And therefore, immediately you start thinking about, well, what's my truth? What's most important to me? What delusions am I living? How do we reduce harm? How do we stay curious and stay present to this stuff? As you say, the totality of existence, not lean into it, not turn away from it. And a big part of it is how do we try and be somehow intellectually rigorous, but not pretend that all our ways of, all our models and our disciplines and our ways of having authority on the way the world is, actually matter now. I mean, and the problem is many climate scientists can't do that, and they get triggered by people like me.
Yes.
But that's another big impact for me on the last 18 months, is to learn not to. I've had to learn in an actual visceral emotional way, not to be affected by people sort of telling stories that suit their own purposes about what this person called Jem Bendell is, or what he thinks. It's quite a peculiar one.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're an enormous magnet. You draw people's projections on all kinds of things. That's why I loved how you dealt with it. So, in my mind, or so effectively in that "Don't Police Our Emotions" piece, and some of your other work.
Yeah. So now, I mean, you mentioned coronavirus. So assuming the internet's up, this is an important time for learning. I have noticed in me and in other people the way that we deal with stress, so anxiety, uncertainty, and also more near-term risks to ourselves. For example, fear of being disciplined somehow by an employer for just unilateral action. Often what we do is we complain. And so in the last 2 weeks, I've had lots of colleagues, family members and friends complaining, and I have been complaining about management, about government officials, about politicians, about the human race in general. And we complain and we complain, and it actually, I've realized what it does, it provides on some strange level an excuse for not living your own truth right now. And this happened yesterday. A colleague, he on the phone for half an hour complaining about management, complaining that they still haven't done it and all these other universities have done it, and Oh, sorry, Jem, I now need to go and teach my students. I was like, excuse me, just don't go. Oh, well, we haven't decided yet. Well, just put a note on the door. Otherwise, complaining won't, complaining about management doesn't stop you from dying, and it doesn't stop you from spreading the virus. So there is this, so being in it, I mean, this is either a dress rehearsal for what's to come in terms of societal breakdowns, or it's the beginning of it. It's the early stages. And I think on some levels it is the early stages, because even if it dies down in the Northern Hemisphere this summer, it's a huge long-term economic impacts. Totally wrong-headed subsidies. Socialism for corporations is going to happen. It's going to put a drag on the states, put a drag on normal sort of business as usual and so forth. And so it's yet another. Well, it's a great big tree trunk on the camel's back, but so we'll see what happens. But it means that we can learn a lot through looking at ourselves. And the problem is we don't quite know how to do that in dialogue with others, because we have these old stories of what it means to be respectable and polite, and we instinctively blame other people for what's going on emotionally inside us. So what we've been doing with the Deep Adaptation Forum is inviting people to find new ways of relating. We've borrowed from things like authentic relating practices and circling practices, sometimes called conscious relating. And it's to really bring all of who you are, all your emotions, all your confusions, but own it as what's going on in you. No one's to blame, it's in you. And that you share it vulnerably in pursuit of connection and learning together, recognizing that the sort of more censored ways of showing up, where we avoid stuff, has allowed us collectively to be suicidal, to have ignored threats, ignored horrors around the world already, but also ignored existential threats. So it's insanity, and it's because we just want to be liked. so I've been talking a little bit about the psychology and how we sort of censor ourselves, and therefore we don't explore possible truths. We don't allow for uncertainty, pain, and so on, particularly in the public sphere. But also, yes, that's connected to this demand for positivity, which is connected to the demand for assuming progress and seeking progress. Right. And I think it's because people can't perceive an alternative of how do you get out of bed in the morning and how do you show up at work. And exactly. I've been exploring that. I know that some of your guests have talked about other frames for thinking about post-doom, post-progress frames. And I'm exploring the idea of a frame of retreat. So it's you could call it, I know the one option would be to call it an age of retreat, but that can also sound quite sort of historical, and therefore assuming that one day we'll look back on an age of retreat. So I think maybe more just talking about a culture or a paradigm of retreat, where I mean a retreat from and by industrial consumer society, and what that can also be is like then a retreat into good things, a retreat into a retreat from doing into being, a retreat from assuming impacting on everything else is good into just being curious and receiving and responding. So I'm a retreat away from telling everyone what to do, and a retreat into awareness. So I'm exploring that as a possible philosophical framework.
I like it.
They'll all be everything. I mean, I'd love to know if other people have said that before, or if there's a better framing. Because
well, I mean, there's different metaphors, different models, archetypes, and certainly the retreat. I mean, I like the prodigal species, but that doesn't necessarily imply that we're going to survive this mess, especially given abrupt climate change. Things could wig out easily. But I love the retreat in this sense that if there's anything that the coronavirus is doing, is it's forcing us to retreat from so many things that really were superficial anyway. I mean, it's really, I've had, I don't think, 5 conversations just in the last 3 days with family and others. And it seems to be all around that we're really getting a clear sense of what really doesn't matter. And yet we've been treating it as if it did matter. What matters and what matters most. And those two frames of what really doesn't matter and what matters most are becoming really clear for a lot of people.
Yeah. So I've there are typical phrases like first things first, and I've used that with colleagues and family members. And so, yes, absolutely, retreating from caring what your boss will be, that your boss will be upset. I mean, it's like saying, I said to someone, yeah, okay, great, but your boss doesn't own your body. You don't have to go and do something if it's going to spread risk. And leadership, okay, it's great that we're doing all sorts of things to try and change ideas and communicate online and write letters to union officials and management. But also the first thing you can lead with is just where you put your body. It's there's so much to learn from this current dilemma. Also, for example, the whole prepping thing. I chose not to prep when I realized that there could be near-term societal, well, there will be near-term societal collapse. I have no idea where it starts or when.
Yes.
And I know lots
places,
of people,
as you said before, it already has started.
Yeah, exactly. And so some people immediately look to prep, and some people in a quite sophisticated way. So they move to the country, they choose where they go for all kinds of reasons. They install their own independent off-grid utility stuff, So I decided not to do that because I went on a road trip around Greece, and I realized that you really are totally dependent on industrial civilization anyway for your plastic piping and spare parts and all sorts. And also that I didn't really want to train in how to fight and and all that. So I thought I'd just go down loving, as it were, as opposed to go down fighting. Now,
I'm 1,000% with you. I mean, this is
yeah.
if I'm over prepared and my neighbors aren't. I mean, am I going to be? I mean, most of us aren't sociopaths and psychopaths. We're not going to let our neighbors' kids starve if we've got food. I'd rather die with my neighbors, frankly.
Yeah. So I did all this thinking before, but then I'm still going around a supermarket 3 weeks ago, stacking up lots of tins of tuna and sardines, even though I've been vegan recently, and pasta and so forth, and I'm thinking, well, you know, just being responsible about me and my partner's own food supply for the 3 weeks in case everything shuts down, and then feeling, and then a mix of emotions. One is, this is stupid, this won't work, or oh, this is selfish, I thought you were going to go down loving, not go down shopping, and then the other thoughts is, this isn't good enough, you need twice as much, and then the other thoughts are like, oh, you need to tell all your neighbors.
Yes.
And I have done, but they've just laughed. I think it's changing right now.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, it's. I've realised that prepping was really okay. It's a tiny bit useful, but not really. And I mean, it is useful because we have just-in-time supplies of all foodstuffs,
right, of course.
So it can just break like that. And so, you know, why be the first person to be walking the streets like a zombie asking for food?
I think most of us that are paying attention, at least, have felt everything you just articulated. I mean, we were just given the notice yesterday from the governor of California, the state of California, that if you're over 65, you should not leave the house. Well, my wife Connie's 67. And so we talked about it today, and tomorrow we're putting a note in the mailbox of all of the neighbors. And I'm even saying I was wearing gloves when I sealed the envelope. But I'm basically saying, if you're over 65, or if you get sick and you need groceries, I'm happy to go grocery shopping and leave it on your porch. And we're seeing that kind of neighborliness. And I didn't get this idea. It didn't come from me. Somebody told me they did that. And I thought, well, that's a brilliant idea.
So this is really, really important. Because what I was talking about was when something becomes immediate right now, and it's almost like embodied learning. Like I had done my thinking, but it's a totally different experience pushing a trolley around the supermarket, thinking, what am I doing? How am I thinking? Who am I thinking about? Is this really meaningful, coherent action and all that? But there's another thing, which is, okay, what is best to do to be helpful right now, to be kind and wise right now? And what you've just said is one example of it. And I'm wondering, because I was going to ask you how you're feeling with Connie getting that notice, but I do want to know that. But also how you've just reacted. How do we spread that? How you found out through someone told you? I was thinking it'd be really good to spread that. I don't know if it's been spread through mass media.
Well, I don't know, but I know that Connie came up with an idea this morning that just rocked my world, because I had not thought about it, and there was something morally wow when she said it. She wrote it up, and we've not even, I think she shared it with just a few colleagues so far, but essentially it was like a pledge. She was appealing to boomers and older, boomers and beyond, and she said, I'm inviting you to join me in this pledge, which is to not overwhelm the healthcare systems, and because that could easily happen. It's already happened in Italy, and it's projected to happen in lots of other places. And so, speaking for herself, she said, if I get coronavirus, I refuse to be taken to the hospital unless there's clearly beds and whatever available. But if not, I'm going to ride this one out. And if it means that I die, then I'm going to actually feel good, because I've lived 67 years. I've lived a pretty wasteful lifestyle with it, not being conscious. She's been an environmentalist and everything else, but still been living a part of this culture. And it feels redemptive to be able to say, I accept my mortality, and I don't accept the need to clog up a bunch of ICU units when there are other people that are younger. So she's basically making this appeal on behalf of the younger generation, that people who are over 65, only if they're volunteer. I mean, nobody's forcing anybody to do this, but basically it's willing to say, I'm willing to die if need be. I'm going to ride this out. And
how do you feel about it?
I'm torn, because on the one hand, I genuinely admire, Connie and I both have a sacred, meaningful, inspiring approach to mortality and death. For years, we did programs on a sort of sacred science approach to death. So that's easy for us. But when it comes down personal, and I think the possibility in the next, say, 2 months of her contracting it, and then maybe there's only a, 5 or 6% possibility that she could be among those who die or need ICU. And I've promised to not override her. And I'm torn, because I'd so honor her in that, and I will honor her in that. And yet for me to say that I don't feel some anticipatory grief if that became real would be a lie. So It's a very interesting place. I do believe that baby boomers who expect to be kept alive at whatever the cost to the system and whatever the cost to the next generations are doing the next generations a horrific injustice. That we don't factor in. I used to do this program where I had this guy in ICU, and I say, now imagine this guy is 81 years old. He's had a fabulous life, an enormous legacy. And in his last 7 months of his life, he's kept alive like this at the cost of 46 college educations. What's his net legacy? And I have all these white-haired people in the audiences, they're nodding. They don't want their dying months to be such a burden on the next generations. And yet that's all the incentives in the healthcare system, at least in the United States, to do it that way. So in that sense, I deeply honor this approach that Connie's has, but yeah, I got some feelings around it too.
So yeah, there's the broader issue of a medical system, culturally, but also economically, and a social care, private social care system as well, and our death-phobic culture, which means that the proper conversations and voluntary euthanasia is just not looked at.
But that is one of the things that we've done differently. We gave both sides of our family a living will 10 years ago, and where we didn't see death as the enemy, we didn't see it as a problem, we didn't see it as a result of human sin or whatever. I went through cancer treatment 10 years ago where there was a short period where I thought I could die quickly. And so I've been at peace with my own mortality in a less than just abstract kind of way. But still, this coronavirus, to come back to that, is bringing everything, all of our theories, all of our talk, all of our planning, all of our everything right up front and focused. And I think it's certainly, I can speak for myself, it's providing an opportunity for me to not take my life for granted. The game that Connie and I are playing is that this will be our last year. Now we're just playing this game in our mind, in our hearts, but we're imagining how would we live our lives? What would our relationships be like if within 12 months we died? And that is the most fruitful, spiritually nourishing practice, perhaps in my life.
That's a very simple and powerful, and perhaps the most significant example of what we were talking about earlier, which is not escaping the pain of being alive, not trying to numb the pain or avoid future unbearable pain, and just recognize it as an aspect of life. And therefore, to truly love something, you have to know that will mean there'll be more pain, and that's just how it is.
That's exactly.
So yeah, definitely. I think though that there's a lot that holds us back in our culture from just being with that. We want to sort of move on and sound confident and find ways to be okay with it all. But yeah, it's I'm just thinking with is that something that we want to, that, no, I say we, I'm wondering if that idea spread, a pledge. Everything can have positive and negative implications. If it becomes a sense of virtue signaling and therefore becomes sort of something that people feel that, oh yeah, I should do that too because all my neighbors have committed to the pledge. And then if you then add in a bit of social pressure from patriotism and leaders saying the same thing, then it becomes quite worrying.
Yeah, no, this is really good. I'm glad you're saying this.
Because already hospitals have their methodologies. They don't really shout about them, but they do. They look at the number of viable living years of various different patients, and they do have to make decisions about and unfortunately, the sad thing is those decisions are being made now in Italy about who they try and focus on treating and keeping alive.
Exactly.
So it is there already, and we do need to be careful about it. I think it is the time in our death-phobic culture right now to have conversations about death in families, and also then to make amends. I mean, the fourth R in the Deep Adaptation Framework is reconciliation, and that can. So right now, I would, in the same way you've talked about, this might be your last year with Connie. Then, what is it that you most want to say to each other? So, and also, my brother messaged me the other day and said, write a letter to each of Mum and Dad as if this is it. Not as an email, but and not with any sort of melodrama, but just a really nice, kind, gentle letter on a piece of paper.
Yes.
Because we don't all live together. I'm on the other side of the world right now and not able. I just won't be able to get back now for months.
Right.
So yeah, it is an invitation for that kind of conversation, and I've wanted to have those conversations with my mum and my dad, both in their 70s, for a few years. But then I thought, it felt a bit odd to maybe give them as a present, Die Wise.
It's a wonderful book. Right?
I know, right? So it's
Grief Walker. An hour and 10 minutes. You get sort of the Stephen Jenkinson, hit in that little documentary, Grief Walker.
All right, then. So I'll send them a link to that, and ask for a conversation immediately afterwards.
I've actually done that with my family. I've purchased several copies of the DVD, offered it to my family, and there's been a couple of conversations that I've had. My kids have all watched it. My first wife, my mother hasn't watched it, but it's one of the better tools that we've found in terms of even opening up that conversation.
Yeah. So another aspect of, this is the first conversation I've sort of had publicly where it's my views. I keep doing my monthly Q&As, but this is the first one since October because I wanted to be less prominent and just do a bit more exploration. But it's the first time I've talked about coronavirus, and so I think I should say, so it has come as a bit of a surprise to the core team and the 50+ volunteers of Deep Adaptation. I'm very grateful to some of the volunteers who in January were saying, Jem, this is so important, could be really massive, and although it's not directly climate related, it's so related to the whole Deep Adaptation framework and philosophy about preparing for collapse and being kind and wise in that context. And so, yeah, I am wanting, we will announce quite soon and put out through all the networks, about 15,000 people in our networks. We're going to invite more people to step up and organize online deep listening circles for people to express and connect around difficult emotions. And then perhaps a second step would be online, the Death Cafe format, where people in small groups just sit and talk about their relationship with death. Because if 70% of most populations are going to get this, and then death rates for over 70s are 15%, if or something. If so, yeah, there will be
Yes.
a lot of loss.
Yes.
So yeah, holding that and help, and especially when we've got physical distancing of people, holding that. So yeah, I'm although I'm not the boss of the Deep Adaptation Forum, I realize that if I put out my own view on blogs and newsletter and stuff, it can help trigger things, make things happen. So I'll be doing something this week on that.
Yeah.
And I think in a way that recognizes that there's very professional ways of holding space, and there's very professional ways of in groups, but also counseling people one-to-one.
Yeah.
But while recognizing that, inviting people to just step up as people who just know how to switch on a Zoom meeting and have a conversation.
Yes.
Recognizing it doesn't replace the need for professionalism, and doesn't replace the need to learn about better practice, but that shouldn't be in a time like this. That shouldn't be the reason for not going ahead in China to start things.
Exactly. Well, I'm curious. I don't want to get too philosophical or too abstract, but I'm curious, how do you and Katie hold impermanence, mortality, death? Like, how do you hold that fact of individual and ultimately collective mortality in ways that you find nourishing, or that help you lean into reality rather than lean away from it?
Sure. You've mentioned Katie there, my partner. This is a big topic for her, perhaps a central organizing principle for her in life. But I haven't talked to her about ever sort of talking about her. So I can't really go into that.
Sure.
Not yet, anyway. Maybe she can be on your show one day.
I would welcome that.
Yeah. I should say I've learned a lot from her on this. But I'm like a D grade student in terms of learning from her on this, because I've still been operating this past year with a story of sort of heroic action, because suddenly deep adaptation took off, so I got really busy. So I haven't got too down with death in my own life. So maybe some period of isolation now will be good for reflection on that.
Anything that you'd like to say about, I would specifically invite you to say something about the 4 Rs. Most of us have found those so helpful, of the Deep Adaptation Framework. And I don't want to assume anybody or everybody watching or listening to this will be familiar with that. So if you could just do a quick recap of why these 4 Rs, what you found value in them and where others have found value.
We live in a culture of positivity, a culture of progress. And when the future, the only certain thing about the future is that normal's finished, and things are going to break down, and we don't know how and when and where. Within that context, it's helpful to have some sort of almost like anti-progress ways of thinking about what's important. So it's okay, if everything is going to change, what's most important to me? I mean, that's a quite straightforward conversation to have. Mm-hmm. And I would suggest there shouldn't be any fixed answer to that. It's a constant inquiry. So the R's, I mean, I just came up with labels for them, and
yeah, but go ahead and mention those.
Okay, so the first is resilience. What do we want to keep? Second is relinquishment. What do we give up on, or it makes things worse? Restoration. What can we bring back to help? And reconciliation. With what or whom should we make peace with in the face of our mutual mortality? I deliberately stayed away with what can we regenerate, or what can we regenerate. I didn't want that idea that this hint that it will be okay, because my truth is I don't know. I don't know what form of human society or civilization is ahead for us. I don't know I mean, I do know many people will do amazing things with loving kindness and wisdom, no matter what's happening. I don't know what that will add up to at a collective scale. I know there'll be horrible behaviors as well. I just don't know. But what I do know is that you can try and be kind, loving, and promote beautiful stuff no matter what. So that's kind of, I mean, speaking to a reverend here, I realize that for me, that's the meaning of Christian hope. Is not a material hope, and it's a conviction in there being goodness to be found and to be lived no matter what. That's it. And I know that the theologians over the centuries in different denominations have argued about this, and I think that an old Catholic notion of hope is that with bodily resurrection and all that. But
just to be clear, I'm an ecotheologian. So for me, Gaia, the universe, is divine, and for me, hope, it's not about hoping for something otherworldly or supernatural or something that gets me out of death. It's trusting the reality of the ecological patterns, the evolutionary patterns, which includes death.
So what you were just saying about a philosophy on existence and the future with deep time, infinite time, can be helpful when one begins to understand or have a felt sense of impermanence and death. And I realized that just expanding my sense of self to include Gaia, if it's not done in a sort of a naive bliss-seeking way, then it's also expanding to include the pain of not just death, because that's part of Gaia, but kind of like unnecessary suffering, like the idiocy that leads to, that creates more pain and more death, but also then adds stories of suffering and on top of the pain and the loss. But then I realized that, I felt like it would be helpful to expand my sense of connection to the potentiality for this kind of life in an infinite universe. Then the fact that it exists now means that it has potential to happen again, both here and other places in the universe. And isn't that stunning and amazing and wondrous and awe-inspiring? Now that is kind of, it works for me. But I also recognize it is in the realm of storytelling, in possibly definitely to avoid the pain that comes from a pain that's based on a belief that I am a significant piece of the conscious universe right here, right now. So this story I've just said is attractive because it kind of deals with that existential pain. And what I've learned is that, what is true isn't that story. That story is my story, our story. We don't really know what's true, and we don't even know if we can know what's true because we just have our limited senses and cognition and conceptualization and all this. And so in the end, I just have to be able to live with the unbearability of that I might be totally insignificant in the universe.
But if your larger body is the universe, then that's okay too. You know?
Well, absolutely. So I know that I've had glimpses of this in a range of different practices, breath work, vipassana meditation. I've had glimpses of it where I've been deeply distraught about how life is, and I've gone into nature. So being in the presence of gorgeous ancient trees with fear and death on my mind, also I think somehow connects me to that way of experiencing life as so great and wondrous that I'm just grateful to be having a momentary fleeting experience of it. And even if I'm no more significant than simply witnessing it as a bit of it right now.
Amen. Well, I love the fact that I'm tomorrow, Connie and I will go for a walk among the redwoods, and the humility that just becomes naturally engendered as we walk among these ancient, giant, incredible intelligent beings is just one of the highlights of my life.
You could just save Connie some work and just spend more time with the redwoods, really, and just whack it up uncut, really, because just upload it and as an experiment, just upload it.
Okay, well,
Really,
I'll
how about that?
suggest that to her.
Please, as a gift to your partner. No, Connie, just let it, because really, does she really want to be spending the last weeks or months of her life having to look at us and edit us out?
This is a very interesting.
I mean, come on, really, how can you be into the sacred feminine and then just make her listen to us whitter on and try and make us sound more like clever old men? No. I'm sorry. Do not edit this. Connie, don't do this. Get out there, enjoy your life, breathe the mountain air or wherever you are. Who cares about my journey? Who cares about my journey? Everybody live your life as if it lived, you know, everything you have, everything you eat, everyone you meet, it's thank you and possibly goodbye.
Yes.
Live every moment with thank you, wow, and possibly goodbye.
Yes.
Okay, so goodbye video editing. Fuck that. Get out there and have fun.
I so appreciate what you've just said in these last 3 minutes. Yes, this will be great.
Right. All right then. Good. So this will be up tomorrow then, yeah?
Yeah.
As always, may the forest be with you.